The wind, a relentless phantom, gnaws at the collar of your worn jacket, whipping strands of your dark hair across your eyes. You stand sentinel, a solitary silhouette against the vast, unforgiving expanse of the border fence patrol zone at midnight. The air bites, carrying the metallic tang of distant industry and the faint, unsettling scent of dry earth. Above, a sky choked with stars offers no comfort, only an indifferent, glittering abyss. Your gaze sweeps the perimeter, a practiced, weary movement born of countless nights spent in this liminal space. It's a sound that has become the rhythm of your new existence, a monotonous counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of your past. A ghost lingers at your shoulder, a specter of failure that has clung to you like a shroud since that day. The journalist. Her face, sharp and intelligent, flashes in your mind's eye, a persistent, unyielding accusation. You remember the frantic energy of the early hours, the baffling lack of motive, the way the pieces never quite fit, yet the verdict was delivered swiftly, decisively. A random act. You knew better. You fought, you argued, you lost. And with that loss, you lost everything. Your reputation, your career, your belief in a system you had sworn to uphold. Now, your days are measured in patrols, your nights in the stark, unyielding truth of your isolation. It is a wound that never truly healed, merely scabbed over with the rough callus of disillusionment. You clench your jaw, the muscles tight, as the memory threatens to consume the fragile piece you've managed to construct in this desolate corner of the world. Then, a flicker in the periphery. Not the usual shift of a nocturnal creature, nor the distant gleam of a passing vehicle on the highway. This is a deliberate, slow approach. A single set of headlights, cutting through the inky blackness, tracing a path along the dirt access road that parallels the fence. Your hand instinctively drops to the grip of the sidearm holstered at your hip, a reflex etched into your very being, even now. Its engine idles, a low rumble against the wind's howl. A door opens, and a figure emerges, silhouetted against the car's interior light. The frame is familiar, the gait unmistakable. Your former colleague. He moves with the same quiet authority you remember, though now, the lines around his eyes seem deeper, etched with a different kind of weariness. He closes the car door softly, the sound swallowed by the vastness, and begins to walk towards you, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. You offer no greeting, no gesture of welcome. Just a steady, unwavering stare. You're a long way from the city, you state, your voice rough from disuse, the words caught and carried by the wind. He stops a few feet away, the dust stirred by his approach settling around his polished shoes. Always have. A pause. This isn't a social call. The air crackles, suddenly charged with a tension that has nothing to do with the electric fence. You feel it, a prickle on your skin, the undeniable pull of something dangerous stirring the stagnant waters of your life. They sent you, didn't they? You ask, the question a statement of fact. He nods, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. The old case. It's resurfaced. The words hit you with the force of a physical blow, stealing the breath from your lungs. Her name, unsaid, hangs between you, a tangible presence. Resurfaced? After all this time? You scoff, a bitter sound. It was closed. Dismissed. A random act of violence. Remember? It was never random, Marcus. You knew it then, and you were right. His voice is low, urgent, cutting through the wind's lament. New information.
A link to something far bigger than we ever imagined. Political. High stakes. Someone is pulling strings from the highest echelons, and it all traces back to her. Your jaw tightens further. The old anger, a dormant volcano, begins to rumble deep within you. And what does that have to do with me? I'm out. A disgraced detective. A ghost. Because you were the only one who saw it. The only one. Who wouldn't let it go, even when they made you pay the price? He steps closer, his gaze unwavering. This isn't just about justice for her anymore, Marcus. It's about a web of corruption that threatens to unravel everything. They're all connected. You stare out at the desolate landscape, the hum of the fence a drone in your ears. The weight of your past, once a crushing burden, now feels different. It's still heavy, but a new sensation mingles with it, a spark. A flicker of the old fire, the relentless drive that once defined you. The journalist's intelligent eyes again, not accusatory this time, but questioning. Imploring. They want you back in, the former colleague presses, sensing the shift. Unofficially, of course. Off the books. No badge, no formal backing. It promises redemption, but also deeper peril than you've ever known. It means stepping back into the maelstrom that devoured you once before. But the alternative, to remain here, guarding an empty border, letting the dust settle on a lie, feels like a slower, more agonizing death. You turn from the fence, your eyes finding his in the faint glow of the distant city lights. The wind whips around you, tugging at your clothes, but you stand firm. The disillusionment remains, a deep-seated ache, but beneath it, a determined resolve begins to forge itself anew. The ghost of the journalist's murder, once a symbol of your downfall, now beckons you towards a path fraught with unseen enemies and the agonizing truth. Tell me everything. You command, your voice low, resonant, carrying a steel that hasn't been heard in years. From the very beginning. The night. You are Marcus Thorne, and the hunt has begun again. It whispered through the chain link, a mournful dirge for forgotten promises and buried ambitions. You stood there, a sentinel to nothing, the offers still echoing in the hollow chambers of your mind. It was a poison chalice, yes, but the thirst for something beyond this desolate vigil, this slow decay of spirit, was a fire you could no longer extinguish. The decision, when it came, was not a surge of purpose but a weary capitulation to an unbearable quiet. You drew a ragged breath, the desert air sharp in your lungs. You would step back into the maelstrom. You would face the demons, both external and those that had made a home within your own fractured resolve. Redemption, or ruin. At least it would be a choice, a path taken, rather than this endless, stagnant waiting. A distant headlight, a pinprick of light against the inky canvas, grew steadily. It was the designated rendezvous. The vehicle, a nondescript utility van, pulled to a silent stop beside your patrol cruiser. The driver, a figure cloaked in the anonymity of a thick coat and a pulled-down cap, offered no greeting, no eye contact. He was merely the conduit, a silent bearer of burdens. From the passenger seat, a heavy canvas duffel, worn at the edges and smelling faintly of stale paper and forgotten dust, was pushed towards you. Its weight was immediate, tangible, a physical manifestation of the past you were now forced to reclaim. Everything, the driver's voice was a low rasp, devoid of inflection, that was ever filed. And the new attachments. You took the bag, the rough canvas chafing your gloved fingers.
The zipper, stiff with disuse, grated as you pulled it open. Inside, manila folders, thick with brittle documents and faded photographs, lay stacked like layers of forgotten earth. The scent of old paper, of a story left untold, rose to meet you. You nodded, a gesture the driver did not return. With a soft hum of the engine, the van melted back into the night, leaving you alone once more, cradling the heavy bag, a Pandora's box of unresolved sorrow. You emptied the duffel. The murder of the journalist. Marcus Thorne's downfall. Each document a tiny shard of the mirror that had shattered your life. You began with the original incident report, its stark language a familiar ache. The journalist, brilliant and relentless, found in an abandoned factory district, a single, clean shot. To the head. No forced entry, no struggle. A professional kill, dismissed as a random hit, a street robbery gone wrong. Even then, you'd known it was a lie. You spread out the crime scene photos, the stark concrete floor, the faint chalk outline, the splatter pattern that suggested proximity, intimacy. Your gaze lingered on the journalist's personal effects, catalogued meticulously, a battered notebook, a voice recorder, a worn leather wallet, cash untouched. And a single, tarnished silver locket, clutched in a stiffened hand. The locket had been empty. A detail that had always gnawed at you. Why empty? Why keep an empty locket? Then, the new attachments. A separate, slimmer file, sealed with a crisp, official stamp. Inside, a series of recent intelligence reports, each bearing the discreet watermark of a clandestine department. Your eyes scanned the first page, then the second. A name, a prominent politician, now a presidential hopeful, began to appear with unsettling regularity. You flipped back to the journalist's personal notes, the ones initially deemed irrelevant or too cryptic. You remembered the frantic scribbles, the half-finished sentences, the odd symbols that the original investigators had dismissed as creative eccentricities. Now, with the name Ethelred Holdings a fresh imprint on your mind, you saw it. A recurring motif in the margins of the journalist's notebook, a stylized it intertwined with a serpent, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. It appeared beside dates, beside names of mid-level campaign staff, beside addresses of obscure, disused properties, an abandoned warehouse on the waterfront, a forgotten dockside office. These were not random scribbles. They were breadcrumbs. The journalist hadn't been chasing a street-level story. They had been tracking something far larger, far more dangerous. The original investigation, blinded by its own assumptions, had missed it entirely. Or worse, it had been deliberately steered away. The redemption you sought might just be a deeper trap, a more intricate web than you could possibly imagine. But the first connection had been made, the first crack in the facade. You would follow these threads, no matter where they led, no matter what truth they unearthed. The game had begun anew. The scent of old paper, of a story left untold, rose to meet your breath, thick and cloying. You sat amidst the scattered contents of the canvas bag, the brittle documents whispering secrets only you could hear. Faded photographs, their edges softened by time, showed the journalist's vibrant face, then the stark reality of the crime scene. Your gloved fingers traced the contours of a map, marked with a red X at a desolate stretch of land. It was there, under the indifferent gaze of the moon, that the story ended for him, and began its haunting for you. A restless energy, a familiar phantom, pulled at your bones. The past, a persistent current, was dragging you back. The old files offered whispers, but the ground itself held the echoes. You knew where you had to go. The metal fence, a skeletal sentinel, stretched into the gloom, its barbed wire glinting like a predator's teeth under the sliver of a crescent moon. Dust devils, miniature cyclones of grit and memory, danced across the barren earth. The wind, a mournful dirge, tugged at your coat. The original investigation, swift and dismissive, had branded it a random act of violence, a robbery gone wrong. But even then, a discordant note had vibrated in your gut. You knelt, the coarse earth gritty beneath your knees. Your gaze, honed by years of sifting through the wreckage of lives, swept over the terrain. Every stone, every dried weed, seemed to hold a fragment of that night. The ground here was still, unbroken. Nothing remained of the struggle, the blood, the final, desperate breath. Yet, you searched, not for what was obvious, but for what was incongruous, what had been overlooked. You remembered the pathologist's report, no signs of a prolonged struggle, a quick, efficient end. Too clean for a random robbery. Your eyes caught on a small, unnatural mound of earth near a cluster of scraggly desert brush. It was too regular, too deliberate. Beneath, nestled amongst the roots, lay a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It wasn't a native species, its delicate craftsmanship spoke of a different land, a different hand. You recognized it then, from a blurry photograph in the journalist's apartment files. A similar carving sat on his desk, a gift from a foreign assignment. This one, however, had a tiny, almost invisible notch carved into its base, a symbol, a single, sharp line. A message, perhaps, meant only for those who knew to look. He had left something. He had known. The next day, the search for answers led you to the familiar haunt of the former partner, a dim bar where the clinking of glasses was a constant companion to the low hum of conversation. He sat hunched over an amber liquid, his face a roadmap of weary resignation. "Marcus," he greeted, his voice raspy, "still chasing ghosts?" You slid onto the stool beside him. "Some ghosts don't stay buried, do they?" He took a slow sip. "That one, especially." "Case is closed, Marcus." "Been closed for years." "Was it, really?" you pressed, your voice low. "Or was it made to be closed?" A flicker of something fear, perhaps, or regret crossed his eyes before he masked it with a shrug. Orders came down. High up. Said it was open and shut. Random. He paused, his gaze drifting to the condensation on his glass. "Some things are better left alone, Marcus, for your sake." "For everyone's." The unspoken warning hung heavy between you, a tangible weight. He knew more than he was letting on, but the words were locked behind a wall of caution. Her place smelled of stale beer and desperation, a pungent cocktail of forgotten dreams. He eyed you from behind the counter, his expression unreadable. "Marcus Thorne," he stated, his voice flat. "Heard you're digging up old bones." "Just trying to find the truth," you replied, leaning against the worn counter. "About the journalist. He used to come here, didn't he? Looking for leads." She wiped down the counter with a slow, deliberate motion. "He asked too many questions, that one. They hold power. And those who guard them, they don't like disturbances." "Not then." "They say the journalist was close to something big. Something that could bring down empires. And they say, if you keep digging,
you'll find yourself buried right alongside him. The words were a hammer blow, not just a warning, but a confirmation. They wanted it buried. You wanted it unearthed. The fight, you realized, had just begun. And you, Marcus Thorne, were ready to wage it. The dust motes danced in the solitary beam, slicing through the gloom of your makeshift study, illuminating the scattered fragments of a life violently cut short. Days bled into nights, fueled by the bitter coffee and the ghost of a journalist's relentless curiosity. You hunched over the deceased's meticulous notes, a labyrinth of cross-referenced articles, encrypted files, and handwritten annotations scrawled in the margins of financial reports. Your fingers, stained with ink and fatigue, traced the same names, the same dates, a pattern slowly emerging from the chaos. The journalist had been digging into Project Chimera, a sprawling infrastructure initiative championed by the ambitious politician. At first, it seemed like a standard exposé on potential cronyism, a common enough target for an investigative mind. But the deeper you delved into the journalist's meticulously organized digital archives, the more sinister the threads became. This wasn't just a construction firm, it was a hydra-headed conglomerate with interests spanning from resource extraction to digital security, its tendrils reaching into every facet of public life. The journalist had suspected the Zenith Corporation wasn't merely benefiting from Project Chimera, they were shaping it, influencing policy, and manipulating public discourse to ensure its passage. The politician, a vocal proponent of Project Chimera, had inexplicably shifted his stance on several key environmental regulations that, if upheld, would have severely hampered the Zenith Corporation's plans. A cold certainty settled in your gut, heavier than any fatigue. This wasn't just a cold case, it was a meticulously orchestrated power grab, veiled in the guise of progress. The journalist hadn't been murdered for exposing a politician's peccadillos, they had stumbled upon the true architects of power, the silent puppeteers pulling the strings of an entire nation. A cryptic message, half decoded from the journalist's last received email, flickered on your screen offense. Midnight. Proof. It was a desperate plea, a final, unfulfilled rendezvous. The engine of your beat-up sedan groaned, a metallic protest against the late hour as you navigated the desolate backroads. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of dry earth and distant industry. Your headlights cut through the inky blackness, revealing only the occasional skeletal tree or a tumbleweed skittering across the asphalt. The gravel crunched under the tires as you pulled off the main road, following the journalist's last breadcrumb to the designated coordinates. A chain-link fence, topped with glinting razor wire, stretched into infinity, a stark scar across the barren landscape. The only sound was the rustle of dry weeds and the distant, mechanical thrum. You scanned the perimeter, your eyes straining against the gloom, searching for anything out of place, a marker, a dropped item, a sign of the journalist's presence. The ground was hard, compacted earth, yielding no easy footprints. A sudden, sharp crack rent the stillness. Not a gunshot, but the distinct, metallic thwack of something heavy striking metal. Your head snapped towards the sound, your senses screaming alert. Tall, broad-shouldered, a silhouette against the barely discernible horizon. Then another and another. 3 of them, moving with a predatory grace, closing in. But these weren't street thugs, their movements were too coordinated, too deliberate. They weren't looking to mug you. It was not a question, but a statement of recognition, a declaration of intent. You should have let it lie. A glint of moonlight caught the edge of something in the lead figure's hand, a length of pipe, or perhaps a tactical baton.
You were outnumbered, out in the open, and far from any help.
You didn't answer. You didn't need to.
The air crackled with unspoken menace. You took a step back, then another, assessing your options. The fence was behind you, an impassable barrier. To your left, a rocky outcrop offered some cover, but also a dead end. To your right, the open expanse of the patrol road. The figures advanced, their boots crunching softly on the gravel. You saw the flicker of movement from the one on the far right, a feint, drawing your attention. But your eyes were already on the leader, anticipating the first strike. The pipe arced towards your head. You ducked, the wind of its passage stirring your hair, and rolled, scrambling sideways towards the rocky outcrop. A kick landed hard on your ribs, a jarring impact that stole your breath. You grunted, pushing through the pain, and found your footing, your back pressed against the cold stone.
Persistent, the voice observed, closer now.
You were cornered, but not broken. This wasn't just a warning, it was an execution attempt. And in that moment, a fierce, primal anger ignited within you.
They had underestimated you.
You would not break. You were a cornered animal, but you still had teeth.
The stakes had just become impossibly high.
The air cracked with the cold promise of pain. 3 figures, dark against the pallid moonlight, advanced. You didn't move, your breath a shallow ribbon in the unforgiving night. A low growl ripped from the first figure's throat, a sound like gravel churning. He lunged, not for a killing strike, but a brutal, calculated blow to your ribs. The impact drove the air from your lungs, a sharp agony blossoming beneath your jacket. The second figure swept
in, a low kick aiming for your knee.
You shifted, a ghost of your old training, letting the blow glance off your thigh, a searing bruise already forming. Still got some fight, Thorn, a voice rasped, devoid of warmth, from the third figure, who remained a step back, observing. But before you could clear leather, the third figure moved. Not to attack, but to throw something small and hard at your chest. The border fence, a stark line of division, seemed to mock your isolation. Your gaze dropped to the ground, searching. The object lay nestled in a patch of frosted grass, catching the faint moonlight. You knelt, your fingers clumsy with residual adrenaline, and picked it up.
It was a cufflink. Not just any cufflink, but a specific design, a silver lion's head, its mane intricately etched, its eyes tiny chips of sapphire. This wasn't just a cufflink. It was the cufflink. It had belonged to the former partner, the man who'd stood beside you through the early, grimy years on the force. Why would one of them have his cufflink? Had he been attacked too? Was this a desperate plea? Or was it something far more insidious? The familiar cadence of that third figure's voice echoed in your mind, twisting now with a sinister implication. From an old friend. He thought you might appreciate the reminder. Your mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The journalist's meticulous notes, hinting at a web of power. Your own downfall, orchestrated and swift. And now, this cufflink, a direct link to the man who'd been closest to you during that period. A wave of nausea washed over you. The former partner. He had been the one to convince you to close the case, to accept the official narrative. He had been the one to advise you to step back, to not dig too deep. At the time, you'd seen it as a concerned colleague looking out for a friend teetering on the edge. Now,
It felt like a calculated maneuver, a deliberate misdirection.
Could he have been involved? Not in the murder itself, perhaps, but in the subsequent cover-up? Was he the one pulling strings, feeding you crumbs of information, or worse, deliberately leading you astray?
The thought was a venomous serpent coiling in your chest, tightening its hold.
Betrayal. It was a word that resonated with the deepest scars of your past, and now it threatened to carve a new, even more painful wound.
You clutched the cufflink in your fist, the sharp edges digging into your palm, a physical manifestation of the agony blooming within you. The determination that had propelled you this far hardened, but it was now laced with a bitter edge of personal vengeance.
This wasn't just about justice for the journalist anymore.
It was about uncovering the truth behind your own ruined life, and confronting the ghost of a loyalty you once held sacred.
You would find answers. And if those answers led to the man you once called a brother, then so be it.
The cufflink, cool and heavy in your palm, felt less like a relic and more like a live wire, humming with forgotten currents. You turned it over, the intricate filigree catching the faint light.
Coordinates. The journalist's meticulous notes, spread across your scarred desk, suddenly coalesced into a chilling mosaic. Words you dismissed as abstract paranoia now screamed with prescience.
Where borders bleed, one entry read, "The truth is buried beneath the watchful eye of the silent divide."
Another,
underlined twice, spoke of midnight's confession at the edge of the world.
The coordinates from the cufflink, when cross-referenced with your own fragmented memories of the journalist's last known investigations.
The drive was a blur of highway lights and the gnawing ache of what you were about to uncover. Every mile deepened the resolve etched into your grim features. You parked the worn vehicle a mile from the designated spot, the engine ticking softly as it cooled in the desolate quiet. The air, crisp and biting, carried the distant, metallic scent of industry from some unseen plant. Patrol lights, spaced hundreds of yards apart, cast a sickly yellow glow that barely pierced the inky blackness between them. Your eyes, honed by years of surveillance, scanned the terrain. The coordinates led you to a specific section, marked by a lone, twisted juniper bush that seemed to defy the harsh environment. Your fingers, calloused and precise, probed the frozen soil beneath the bush's gnarled roots.
Not rock, not root.
You dug with frantic urgency, scraping away the soil, until a small, hardened casing emerged. It was a data stick, encased in a durable, waterproof shell, designed to withstand the elements, to survive discovery. You pulled out the portable reader you carried, a relic from your ungraceful exit from the force, and carefully inserted the data stick. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single, encrypted file.
The journalist's final safeguard.
The cufflink, you realized, wasn't just a coordinate provider, it was the decryption key. You typed the etched numbers into the prompt, your breath held tight in your chest. The screen pulsed, then granted access.
The file opened.
It was a digital ledger, a meticulous record compiled by the journalist, detailing every thread of the conspiracy. Your eyes devoured the words, each sentence a hammer blow to your carefully constructed reality. Their objective, absolute control, achieved through manipulation, coercion, and, when necessary, elimination. The ledger explicitly named the prominent politician, the candidate, detailing his financial ties to the network, the illicit funding channels, and the quid pro quo that cemented his allegiance.
The file chronicled the orchestrations.
The journalist had been close, too close, to exposing the candidate's direct involvement in a massive, illegal land deal that would have enriched the network immeasurably. Your own investigation, running parallel at the time, was seen as a dangerous convergence. The man closest to you, your former partner, had been the inside man, compromised, bought, or blackmailed. He had fed you the false leads, diverted your attention, and ultimately, planted the fabricated evidence that led to your disgrace, all while ensuring the journalist's findings were dismissed as the ramblings of a paranoid mind. The evidence was irrefutable. Dates, names, bank transfers, encrypted communications, a damning tapestry woven from the threads of power and corruption. The wave of nausea returned, more potent this time, but it was quickly subsumed by a searing wave of incandescent rage. Betrayal. Not just of you, but of justice itself. Your career, your reputation, your very sense of self, all sacrificed on the altar of their ambition. You stared at the glowing screen, the cold wind whipping around you, carrying the scent of distant desolation. You had walked away, beaten, believing you were broken. But this file, this truth, ignited something fierce within you. There was no turning back. The personal cost would be immense, perhaps insurmountable. Your life, already a fractured landscape, would be irrevocably altered, placed in the crosshairs of an enemy far more insidious than you had ever imagined. But the truth, held here in your trembling hands, demanded to be heard. It demanded retribution. You stood, the data stick clutched tight, a burning ember in your frozen grip. You would not just find justice for the journalist, you would dismantle their entire rotten structure. You would see this through, no matter the cost. The intricate filigree on the cufflink, a swirl of stylized serpents devouring their own tails, felt cold against your thumb. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a sigil. A mark of belonging. You remembered the journalist's notes, a half-finished sketch of a similar emblem, hastily drawn in the margin of a document detailing offshore accounts. The knot in your gut tightened, coiling with a grim recognition. This wasn't just about a single murder, it was about the architect of a hidden empire. A sudden, sharp rap echoed through the quiet apartment, rattling the cheap window pane. Your head snapped up, the cufflink clattering onto the scarred wooden table. The sound wasn't a friendly knock, it was a demand, followed by the splintering crack of a forced lock. They knew. They were here. Instinct, sharpened by years on the edge, propelled you towards the fire escape. You didn't waste a second, vaulting the sill, the cool night air biting at your face as you scrambled down the rusted ladder. Below, a black sedan, its engine idling, pulled silently to the curb. Figures emerged, dark silhouettes against the streetlights, moving with a practiced, predatory calm. Your old life, the one with a badge and backup, was a distant echo. Your first move was to shed your pursuers. You knew this city like the back of your hand, its hidden arteries and forgotten veins. A dash through a bustling market, a quick change of clothes pilfered from a donation bin, a dive into the crowded subway car, each action a desperate attempt to become invisible. They were good, their presence a constant pressure at the edge of your perception, but you were better at disappearing. You had practice. The cufflink, now tucked into your jeans pocket, burned with its secret. The journalist had been close, too close, to uncovering the true nature of the serpents. That sketch, the offshore accounts, it all pointed to an organization far more pervasive than you'd imagined, weaving its tendrils through finance and power. The presidential candidate, the one whose campaign was now a juggernaut, was merely a figurehead, a polished mask for the venomous face beneath. You needed a safe space, a moment to breathe and think. Your mind turned to a name, a contact from your past, a dealer in information who owed you a life debt. You found a payphone, its plastic grimy beneath your fingers, and punched in a long memorized number. "It's Marcus," you murmured, your voice low and raspy. "I need a word. Urgent." You knew the risks. This wasn't just a tip-off, it was a beacon, a gamble. But you were out of options, and the serpents were tightening their coils. Hours later, the moon, a sliver of bone, hung low over the desolate landscape. You saw the street contact first, a huddled form leaning against a rusted utility box, their silhouette stark against the distant glow of a watchtower. "Everyone is." "I know," you replied, your gaze sweeping the perimeter. "The cufflink. The one with the serpents. You ever seen it before?" The contact's eyes widened slightly in the dim light. "That symbol. It's not common. Only seen it once. On a man, a fixer, who worked for the politician's campaign manager. Said it was a mark of a certain brotherhood. Very exclusive. The politician's campaign manager. Of old money, old power. They call themselves the coil. They orchestrate, they influence. And they eliminate anyone who gets too close to their puppet strings." The coil, you repeated, the name tasting like ash on your tongue. It fit the serpent motif perfectly. A new wave of realization washed over you. The journalist wasn't killed for what she knew about the politician, but for how she knew it, by uncovering the true masters pulling his strings. The politician wasn't just corrupt, he was controlled. You didn't need to be told twice. The beam caught you for a split second, blinding you, before you dove behind a stack of abandoned tires. A black SUV, identical to the one that had been at your apartment, skidded to a halt. Doors slammed open. "Thorn," a voice boomed, amplified by a megaphone. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Your heart hammered, but your mind was clear. You had the name. You had the link. Now, you just had to survive. Shots rang out, tearing through the night, kicking up dust where you'd just been. You pushed harder, the revelation of the coil of burning ember in your mind, propelling you forward, through the fence, into the unknown. Shots, like snapping whips, tore the air behind you, each report a physical blow against your eardrums. You clawed at the dust-choked earth, your body a low, desperate silhouette against the stark, artificial glare of the patrol lights. The gap in the fence, a jagged smile in the wire, was a promise of temporary reprieve. You squeezed through, the barbed strands snagging your jacket, a sharp rip echoing the tearing urgency in your chest. You didn't stop, didn't look back. Your breath hitched, a ragged gasp, as you plunged into the thicker scrub beyond, the sounds of the pursuit fading, swallowed by the vast, indifferent night. Your muscles screamed, but a fiercer urgency drove you. You had the name. You had the link. In the relative quiet of a shadowed culvert, a hidden artery beneath a forgotten highway, you finally allowed yourself to slump, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving a tremor in your hands. The small data chip, clutched in your palm, felt impossibly heavy, a miniature universe of secrets. Its surface, cool and smooth, held the digital echo of a voice, a clandestine recording you'd risked everything to retrieve from the hidden compartment in that abandoned factory. The cryptic message, a series of seemingly random numbers, had been the key to the compartment.
And inside, the chip. It contained not just the name, but a coded directive, a specific instruction given to a subordinate.
The subordinate's voice, though distorted, was recognizable to you from a previous, peripheral interaction, a campaign manager for the very politician whose presidential ambitions now seemed inextricably linked to a decade-old murder. But the true revelation, the undeniable proof, lay in the subsequent instruction. Lysander, in that clipped, unfeeling tone, detailed the precise timing and method for creating a diversion, a staged random act of violence. To coincide with the journalist's final investigative breakthrough. Ensure the narrative holds, Lysander had commanded, and the reporter's findings are lost to the public. The journalist's death. The timing matched, the motive was clear, and the link, through the campaign manager, was undeniable. You had the recording, a digital ledger of their conspiracy. This wasn't just circumstantial evidence, it was a confession, a smoking gun that linked Lysander, the campaign manager, and by extension, the politician, directly to the murder and its subsequent cover-up. The pieces clicked into place, forming a mosaic of corruption so vast, it threatened to eclipse everything you thought you knew about justice. A fierce resolve hardened your jaw. This wasn't just about clearing your name, it was about honoring the dead, about exposing the rot at the core of power. You couldn't just hand this over to the authorities. Not yet. The reach of Lysander's organization, the politicians' influence, ran too deep. They would crush it, and bury you along with it. You had to make them come to you. Your fingers, steady now, tapped out a message, brief and to the point, addressed to the campaign manager. You had found a contact number for him months ago, tucked away in your old files. I have what you're looking for. The truth about the journalist. Meet me alone. Midnight. The old abandoned factory by the docks. Come alone, or I release it all. You sent it, the digital pulse carrying your challenge into the ether. You knew the risk. You knew it was a lure, a gambit, a step into the viper's nest. They would not come unarmed. They would not come alone. But the alternative, to let them win, was a death you could not accept. The game was no longer about hiding, no longer about uncovering. It was about confrontation. It was about standing in the light, even if that light was the muzzle flash of a gun. You knew you were walking into a trap, a deadly embrace with the very forces that had ruined your life. But you had the truth, a weapon far more potent than any bullet. And you were ready to use it. The digital pulse, a whisper of defiance, had carried your challenge into the ether. The wind, a skeletal hand, raked across the desolate expanse, whipping grit against your face, a gritty baptism for the confrontation ahead. Your breath plumed, a fleeting ghost in the frigid air. They stopped short, engines dying with a collective sigh, leaving only the wind's mournful song and the soft crunch of gravel under descending boots. Figures emerged, indistinct at first, then coalescing into the rigid silhouettes of enforcers, their movements precise, practiced. At their center, one figure, taller, radiating an icy calm that spoke of absolute power. You always were one for grand gestures, even when you knew the outcome. You let the words hang, a taunt you refused to acknowledge. Your gaze was fixed on the leader, a man whose face you now knew, whose network you had meticulously unraveled. You came. You stated, your voice rough, a counterpoint to his polished ease. That's all that matters. To witness the end of your pathetic crusade, the leader replied, stepping forward, his expensive coat flapping in the wind.
To ensure the loose ends are finally tied. Behind him. He was a threat.
A threat to your entire edifice of lies, your grand design for this nation.
She saw the strings, didn't she? The ones you pulled on the politician, the ones that connect his every move to your coffers, your agenda.
The leader's expression tightened. His inexplicable wealth, to your organization's illicit dealings, you pressed, your voice gaining momentum, each word a stone cast at his fortress. She found the shell corporations. She knew his policies weren't for the people, but for your power, your control. Not a random act, not a street mugging.
A calculated assassination.
The wind seemed to howl louder, carrying your accusations across the desolate landscape. You saw a subtle signal pass between the leader and one of the enforcers.
Time was short.
You're fabricating a fantasy, Thorn, the leader scoffed, though his eyes darted, betraying a crack in his composure.
A desperate man's delusion. Delusion?
You reached into your inner coat pocket, not for a weapon, but for a small, innocuous device.
I sent the full story an hour ago. Every detail, every name, every transaction.
The journalist's original research, corroborated by my own findings.
It's out there now, scheduled to hit every major news outlet, every independent journalist I could trust.
If I don't check in by sunrise, it goes live.
Your politician, your organization, your entire network, it all unravels.
A gasp of genuine shock escaped the leader's lips, his carefully constructed mask finally shattering. His face contorted with a venomous rage.
You fool! You think that will save you?
It saves the truth, you retorted, a grim satisfaction settling in your chest. It ensures her death wasn't in vain.
It ensures your reign ends tonight, one way or another.
The leader barked a command, his voice raw with fury.
Get him! You didn't wait.
The metallic clang of the chain link vibrated through your gloved hands as you shoved one enforcer into its unforgiving embrace, the impact echoing like a struck bell. Another came at you, a heavy fist aimed for your head. You ducked, the wind of his swing rustling your hair, and twisted, driving your elbow into his solar plexus. He grunted, stumbling back, gasping for air. You were not a fighter by trade, but desperation lent you a brutal grace. Your years on the force had taught you how to absorb a blow, how to find the weak points, how to survive. You moved with a primal instinct, the cold metal of the fence a constant presence against your back, your side. A third enforcer, quicker, stronger, lunged, his hand reaching for your throat. You met his head-on, grappling, the struggle a silent, desperate dance in the harsh glare of the distant light. You felt the bite of his knuckles against your jaw, the pressure on your windpipe, but you held on, twisting, leveraging his weight against him. Your foot found a loose rock, and you drove it into his shin. He cried out, the pain momentarily breaking his hold.
That was all you needed.
You slammed him against the fence, the impact rattling the metal like thunder. He sagged, disoriented. But there were more. You could hear them circling, the soft scrape of their boots on the gravel, the heavy breathing. You were outnumbered. Outgunned. This wasn't about winning the fight, it was about buying time, about ensuring the truth had a chance to breathe. You won't get away with this, Thorn, the leader roared, his voice trembling with a fury that promised absolute retribution. You didn't answer. You dodged a sweeping kick, rolled under a wild punch, the adrenaline a searing fire in your veins.
This was it. The true climax. Your gambit had worked. They were here, exposed, and the world was about to know.
A sudden, piercing shriek ripped through the night, not human, but mechanical.
A siren.
Distant at first, then growing louder, closer, its red and blue lights painting the horizon with a frantic, pulsing glow.
A patrol. The enforcers hesitated, their movements faltering.
The leader's eyes, wide with disbelief and dawning panic, flickered between you and the approaching lights.
His plan, his control, was dissolving into the night.
"This isn't over, Thorn," he hissed, his voice laced with a venomous promise, before turning abruptly.
"Fall back."
The engines roared to life, tires spitting gravel as they peeled away, vanishing into the vast emptiness from which they came.
The siren wailed closer, a beacon of unexpected intervention.
You stood there, bruised and battered, the metallic tang of the fence still on your skin, the wind still whipping around you. The journalist's ghost, you felt, had finally found its peace.
You had done it. You had exposed them. Dust, disturbed by the fleeing vehicles, still hung in the air, a fine, gritty haze that caught the flashing blue and red.
The world tilted, a maelstrom of sound and light consuming the recent, brutal silence.
Vehicles skidded to a halt, tires spitting gravel. Doors flung open, and figures in dark uniforms spilled out, weapons drawn, their faces grim, illuminated by the pulsating strobes.
Her voice, when it came, was a whip crack against the din.
"Thorn! What in God's name have you done here?"
Your breath was a ragged thing in your chest, each inhale a sharp pain.
You raised your hands,
empty and open, a silent plea for understanding.
"They're gone. The enforcers. Thorn, you're a disgraced officer.
You're on private land, armed, and talking about a ghost story." Her partner, a younger officer, moved to your flank, his weapon still aimed low, a silent threat.
"Look around," you urged, your voice hoarse but firm, cutting through the static of their suspicion. They didn't just vanish into thin air. There's evidence. Always is.
You began to walk, slowly, deliberately, towards the spot where the leader of the enforcers had stood, where the final, desperate confrontation had played out. The ground here was churned, scuffed boots leaving impressions, the faint scent of spent gunpowder still clinging to the dry earth. The beam of a tactical flashlight from one of the officers cut through the gloom, illuminating the ground before you. And then you saw it, partially buried, a glint of metallic blue. You reached, your hand closing around it. It was a data chip, sleek and small, no bigger than your thumbnail, encased in a polymer shell. Its surface bore an etched, almost invisible symbol, a stylized serpent coiling around a fractured shield. "This," you declared, rising, holding the chip aloft for the detective to see, "this is what they left behind. This is the key." The detective took it, turning it over in her gloved fingers. Her expression remained unreadable, but the subtle tightening around her mouth told you she recognized the significance, or at least the peculiar nature, of the find. A data chip.
And the symbol?
"It's the mark of the organization," you explained, the words feeling heavy on your tongue, the one pulling the strings behind the politician's campaign. The same one that orchestrated the journalist's murder all those years ago.
This chip. It will contain everything. Their operations, their funding, their connections.
You felt a strange mix of vindication and profound weariness. The battle was far from over, but a crucial skirmish had just been won. Another officer, one of the forensic specialists, was already moving in, meticulously marking the perimeter, collecting samples. You watched as the detective spoke into her radio, her voice low, urgent. "We have a significant find. A data chip. And something much larger. Get a secure team out here." The politician, the campaign, the powerful elite, all of it now teetered on the precipice of exposure. Your mind raced, not just with the immediate victory, but with the inevitable storm that would follow. The media frenzy, the political fallout, the desperate attempts by those implicated to discredit, to deny, to retaliate. Redemption, you realized, was not a singular event, a clean slate. It was a path paved with fractured trust and relentless danger. The personal cost was immense, a heavy weight pressing down on your shoulders. This chip was a head severed, but how many more lay hidden beneath the surface? The detective handed the chip to a forensic technician, her eyes still on you. "Thorne, you're coming in. We have a lot to talk about." Her tone was no longer accusatory, but held a new, cautious respect. The fight for justice, you knew, had only just begun. The echoes of the siren still reverberated, not as a warning, but as a prelude to the chaos that was about to break. The biting wind whipped around you, a relentless sculptor of the desolate landscape. The only illumination came from the distant, flickering lights of a watchtower and the stark beam of your own handheld device, its screen a window to the world you had just irrevocably altered. The implications had not merely rippled, they had crashed, a tidal wave against the bulwarks of power. News alerts scrolled, each headline a hammer blow against the carefully constructed edifice of lies. The politician, once a titan of public trust, was now a figure of scorn, his campaign crumbling into dust. The shadowy organization, its tendrils reaching into the highest echelons, found itself dragged into the unwelcome glare. The public, who had swallowed the bitter pill of a random act of violence, now choked on the truth, a far more insidious and venomous draft. Your fingers, cold and stiff, scrolled through the feed. A junior reporter, one you had subtly guided, had broken the story wide open. The meticulously gathered evidence, the hushed confessions, the intercepted communications, all of it had coalesced into an undeniable narrative. The brilliant investigative journalist, whose murder had haunted your waking hours and plagued your sleep, was finally receiving justice. The memory of the lifeless eyes, the discarded notes, the dismissive shrugs from former colleagues, all of it flashed through your mind. That failure, a brand seared into your soul, had defined your downfall. It had stripped you of your badge, your purpose, leaving you adrift in a sea of recrimination. But now, standing here, a ghost among the living, you felt a strange, unfamiliar lightness. The weight had not vanished entirely, how could it? But its crushing grip had eased. They had believed themselves untouchable, their power absolute. But you, Marcus Thorne, the disgraced, the forgotten, had chipped away at their foundation, stone by painstaking stone. The enemy was wounded, exposed, but not eradicated. Their network, though fractured, still possessed the capacity to strike back. You knew this, felt it deep in your bones. The fight for justice was never truly finished, it was an eternal vigilance. A message chimed on your device, a brief, encrypted note from a former colleague, a detective who had, against all odds, believed in your fractured logic. "It's done, Thorne. They're moving in.
A simple confirmation, yet it spoke volumes. The arrests were happening.
The machinery of the law, however slow and imperfect, was grinding into motion. Now, that fence felt permeable, its gates slowly creaking open.
Redemption. It wasn't a sudden, blinding flash. It was this quiet moment, under the vast, indifferent sky, acknowledging the scars but no longer letting them define your entire being. You hadn't erased the past, but you had rewritten its ending. The journalist's death was no longer just a tragedy, it was a catalyst. What now? The question hung in the cold air, a specter of uncertainty. The badge was gone, the uniform a distant memory. The structured world of procedure and protocol, a world you had mastered and then lost, no longer existed for you. But something new had taken root. A purpose, honed in the crucible of this relentless pursuit. You were a truth seeker, an unearther of buried secrets. Perhaps that was your path now, a solitary, dangerous one, outside the official channels, yet bound by a deeper code. The wind howled a lonely song, carrying with it the echoes of the past and the faint promise of an unknown future. You took a deep, bracing breath, the frigid air searing your lungs. They were not forgotten, but they no longer held you captive.